Hi AP students, I wanted to make a video for you for this week like I've been doing to kind of give you some more detail about what your assignment is and to kind of help you go through that as we get even closer to the test. So what you had to do last week was to compare your essay to the samples on AP Central. And so I went to the AP Central too to look at them and how they were scored. So one of the ones that I pulled up for Gandhi's letter to Lord Irwin was actually sample J, and this is not the highest scored one, but it actually scored a 4 out of 6. That would be a B if that were your essay in my class. And as I read sample J, I thought that if I had to kind of synthesize all of the essays that I read last week from our classes, my 2A and 3B class, that sample J was probably the most like yours. And here's why. So I'm going to pull up sample J here. A lot of you organized by strategy. You know that I don't necessarily prefer that method just because you kind of get hamstrung into only talking about those three when writers do way more than that. However, this one scored a 3 for evidence and reasoning because of all of the quotes used in there. And I talk a lot about embedding just all kinds of quotes, short 2-word, 3-word quotes as much as you can. And so this writer does that. So he's got specific diction, logical reasoning, and the overall tone. And I think those are 3 strong ones, and that's why it scored so highly. The problem with those of you who organized by strategy in your essay is that you were choosing really minor strategies that weren't as effective as talking about like a big one like tone or logical reasoning, like appeals to logic. You might just choose the repetition of the word serve, which is definitely something to mention, but repetition, even though it was present in Gandhi's letter, was not as effective as specific. Well, this one says specific diction and repeats the word evil, but specific diction is much more broad than just repetition of one word. Logical reasoning, there's a lot you can do with that one, okay? And then, of course, tone, you can really talk about the full text that way. So as you were able to see on these student responses, I told you a different way you could go in and look at them. You could see how they were scored. So J right here, sample J, got a 1 for thesis, a 3 for evidence, but a 0 for sophistication. Okay, that sophistication point was only awarded to the top 2. It's a very difficult point to get. Okay, so remember, I score you with half points, but the AP graders don't do half points. Either get the point for thesis and sophistication or not. Okay, sophistication can be you have a sophisticated organization style. You don't make a lot of errors. You use rhetorical devices in your own writing to be convincing about this letter. Okay, so if I go back to the samples, the top 2 scored 6s, 6 out of 6. Okay, let's see if I can. And I remember liking the second one the best, sample SS. Again, the author kind of organizes by strategy, which is okay. But if you read this one, the author of the essay is being completely comprehensive about the bigger ideas that Gandhi's putting forth in his letter to Lord Irwin. He's not just focused on this, these few examples of repetition or anaphora, which a lot of you said in your essays and is actually incorrect. But being a lot more broad in the description and just lots of quotes. Okay, so if you didn't get a chance to do last week's assignment where you had to compare your own writing to the samples that I linked in Schoology, I would think about comparing yours to sample SS or sample J. Those are my 2 favorite essays that I think would help you the best with your own writing. Okay, all right, so this week's assignment is another essay. And for some of you, as soon as I say that, you go, okay. But I want you to time yourself for 45 minutes. I'm only asking you to give me 45 minutes of your time for the entire week, okay? Those of you who wrote the essay last week notice that I gave you very, very detailed feedback, and it's all so you can pass the exam. I mean, all my focus and energy is on rhetorical analysis, and yours needs to be too. So I'm only asking for 45 minutes. Here's what you're going to read. All right, let me find the right page here. School. There we go. Okay. All right. So another assignment that you had to do last week was to read Letter from Birmingham Jail by Martin Luther King Jr. and write one body paragraph of analysis. Again, practicing that skill. So this is a full essay. It's also written by Martin Luther King Jr. This is the introduction to a book that he wrote called Why We Can't Wait. And so if you open it up, it's a PDF. Okay, here's your prompt. It's a little bit different than the one on the actual text, so I want you to focus on this first page here where it tells you the actual prompt. It says, read the passage carefully, then write an essay that analyzes the rhetorical choices that King makes to convey his message to his readers. That's a lot more contemporary way that AP graders or AP writers will word questions. So basically, what's his purpose and how does he do it? Okay. It says in your response, you should do the following. This is just how to write a good essay. Respond to the prompt with a thesis that analyzes the writer's rhetorical choices. Demonstrate an understanding of the rhetorical situation. I like to do that in the introduction. That's acknowledging who the audience is, who the speaker is, what the occasion is. That's soapstone. Select and use evidence to support your line of reasoning. Explain how the evidence supports your line of reasoning, okay? And using appropriate grammar and punctuation whenever you can. All right, so the prompt is below. This is an old passage, okay? I don't even think exists on AP Central. So the following passage is the introduction to Martin Luther King's Why We Can't Wait, a book that describes the social conditions and the attitudes of many Black Americans in the 1960s. Read the passage carefully. And then I don't want you to respond to this prompt. I want you to do the one up top. Really, what's his purpose and how does he convey it? Very typical. Okay, so as I was going through this myself, I was making some notes about all of the rhetorical devices that exist in here. And here's what I came up with. And I'm going to go ahead and give you these answers before you even read the piece, all right? First of all, he frames the piece from the perspective of a hypothetical but typical boy and girl in Black America. And they kind of become the symbols of the Negro experience that starts in childhood. There's rhetorical questions. There's allusions to Black history makers. There's kind of a then versus now shift at some point. It talks about the past and versus what the conditions are like now. There's facts of what Negroes have done to survive and do to survive currently. Obviously, you can always talk about tone. Martin Luther King uses lists. Parallel structure. There's a tone shift at the end. Syntax, always looking at the effects of long sentences versus short emphatic sentences. There's religious appeals and appeals to emotions like guilt, hope, or despair. What is not in this piece is concession. There's not anaphora, and there's no appeals really to his credibility. Martin Luther King has credibility just because of who he is. He doesn't have to prove that in the text that he writes. So don't focus on these. Now, if you were to write an essay that picked 3 strategies, and you had one paragraph about one paragraph about the other, and the third about the next, you would miss out on all of these other ones. You'd have to make a paragraph for each of these devices in order for it to be, thorough. So what I'd rather you do, as I've said every time you've written an essay, including back in the fall, is that if you can organize your essay by chronology and what is he doing in the first part, second part, third part, you can get all of these in there. Okay. Now, you don't have to say he uses tone, but what is his tone and how is that convincing? He doesn't use religious appeals, but he appeals to their sense of religion. Okay. He provides facts. That's what he's doing. Okay. He's listing what blank, blank, blank. Okay. So not that he uses lists, but he is listing. That's a much more effective way to say it. Okay. So use my video here to help you with writing your piece. Now that I've kind of given you some answers, look for those in the piece and then decide how you're going to organize it. Try it by chronology, see if it's more effective. Maybe it's not, and maybe you do want to focus on 3. But they'd have to be 3 big and broad ones, just like the examples I showed you on AP Central. Okay, 45 minutes, that's all I'm asking for. Prepare for some more detailed feedback. And as always, you can email me if you have questions or concerns. You can also join me for office hours on Wednesdays from 2 to 3, and we can go over your essays in person if you'd like to do that. I'm there and I'm willing and ready. Okay, all right, good luck. Talk to you soon.